Allen Lund Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Scott Thompson.
It's no secret that trucking can be a lonely profession. There are a whole host of mental health issues that often come with the job, and loneliness is at the top of the list. Therapist Buck Black joins the program with some strategies for dealing with the feelings that sometimes arise. Then, it's one of the most common questions out there when it comes to commercial truck insurance. Do the violations I get in my personal vehicle count against my commercial insurance policy? The short answer is yes, but there's a longer answer too, and Trista Roby and Trina Skywalker of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department have all the details. And finally, if a speed limiter mandate goes into effect, it won't just be truck drivers who are impacted. The general public is going to get stuck in more and more elephant races, as they're sometimes called, and research shows that roadways will be less safe. Colin Long, OOIDA Director of Government Affairs, looks ahead to our possible future and what's being done to stop it. All of that and more coming up over the next hour. But first, the news with Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Scott. Construction on the bridge on I-95 in Pennsylvania continues. Recently, the first beams were set for the permanent reconstruction. A total of 8 100-foot beams were installed. There will be an additional 8 beams installed over the coming months. The temporary roadway structure will remain in place until the outside sections of the bridge are completed later this year. Traffic will then be shifted onto the completed sections of the overpasses, while the center section of the bridge is built in 2024. Back in June, a truck caught fire under I-95 near the Cottman Avenue exit and caused a portion of the highway to collapse. The long weekend made load-to-truck ratios increase for all 3 equipment types. Robert Rouse with DAT says a higher load-to-truck ratio means there is a stronger demand for trucks in the marketplace.
Labor Day is all about beaches, barbecues, and ball games as thousands packed college football stadiums over the weekend. Over 150 million people enjoyed a cookout usually during this time period. And that boosts reefer volumes nationally by just over 5% last week, while capacity still tightened following a 10% decrease in total carrier equipment posts in reefer. And the net result was a 5% increase in reefer load-to-truck ratio from 4.3 to 4.52. So that's good to see. The other thing that we looked at was national benchmark broker carrier spot rates for all 3 equipment types increased last week.
Rouse says vans jumped a little bit to $2.16 per mile, an increase of about 3 cents per mile. Flatbeds came in at $2.58 per mile, another increase of about 3 cents. A truck driver in Nebraska has been awarded $36 million after a jury found Driver Management LLC and Werner Enterprises, Inc. guilty in a disability discrimination claim. According to WIBW, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission announced that the jury awarded Victor Robinson $75,000 in damages and $36 million in punitive damages. Robinson is deaf, and the commission indicated that the truckload carriers failed to hire or make accommodations for him for a truck driving job in 2016. Robinson got an exemption from the hearing regulation for the operation of a commercial motor vehicle, but according to the article, the court records found the company would not hire him as he could not hear. The commission filed the suit in the U.S. District County for the District of Nebraska after it first attempted to reach pre-litigation settlements through conciliation. A recent study by DAT Freight and Analytics found of more than 500 truck drivers surveyed, nearly 75% of them say they find their jobs physically and emotionally stressful. Buck Black is a licensed therapist. He says one of the biggest problems he sees truck drivers having is loneliness.
There are no meds for loneliness. If it is a domino effect and you're feeling really anxious, really depressed, then sometimes medication is appropriate to help to deal with that domino effect. But since I'm a therapist, I really do as many natural things as possible as far as changing your thinking, changing your behavior, eating as healthily as possible, of trying to stay away from the junk, trying to stay away from the fast food. And also having something to look forward to. So as far as your home time, all right, you have that on your calendar. How much longer do I have to be out before I can come home? And a lot of drivers really push it, and they don't have very much home time at all, and they could have more. So I recognize you're not making money if you're at home, but if you can do some extra home time, then that's definitely something that can help.
We'll hear more from Buck Black later in our show. National Trucking Week kicked off in Canada over the weekend. The Canadian Trucking Alliance is asking the industry, politicians, and the public to recognize all the women and men who drive truck and have stepped up to make sure that people have goods and supplies needed to keep Canada's economy moving. Various events are scheduled throughout the week to recognize drivers. National Trucking Week was started in the late 90s by the Canadian Trucking Alliance as a way to embrace the industry and spotlight the contributions of the hundreds of thousands of men and women who keep the country's freight moving. This year could be the deadliest in more than 3 decades for Washington State. The state's Traffic Safety Commission and Washington State Patrol are sounding the alarm on the state's worsening traffic safety crisis. WTSC says initial data shows there were 417 fatalities through July 31st of this year, compared to 413 at the same point in 2022. Last year was the deadliest year on Washington roads since 1990. The commission says everyone who uses Washington roads can do their part to avoid the fatal 4: impairment, distraction, speeding, and not wearing a seatbelt. More than 30 bridges in Kansas will be getting some improvements. Recently, state officials announced new funding sources will be used in more than 30 bridge improvement projects across the state. $42.3 million in funds will go to 35 local and off-system bridge projects. Funding comes from 2 local bridge improvement programs. These programs make use of new revenue sources through the federal bipartisan infrastructure law. 3 major interstate projects have been announced in Alabama. Recently, Governor Kay Ivey announced 2 of the projects involve widening Interstate 65 and Interstate 59. The other will add a new interchange to Interstate 459 in Hoover. ABC 3340 reports that the I-65 project is expected to cost about $300 million. The I-59 project is estimated to cost $80 million, and the I-459 project is expected to cost $120 million. Construction is estimated to take approximately 18 to 24 months, and although it will be split into 3 phases, all 3 projects are expected to be under construction at the same time. It's football season, and Mississippi's Department of Transportation is kicking off its Road to Game Day safety campaign. Mississippi DOT is encouraging people to download the MDOT Traffic mobile app to get real-time access to tools that show road conditions and traffic alerts. MDOT says its goal is to keep drivers safe behind the wheel and roadside workers safe along highways. With more traffic on game days, the department is reminding people to never drink and drive, pay attention to the road and your surroundings, drive the speed limit, use caution when traveling through work zones, wear your seatbelt, and be sure to secure your load. And finally, a rare sight along U.S. Route 275 in Nebraska when police encountered a vehicle that had been modified to allow a bull to ride shotgun. UPI reports that police received a call about the vehicle. Area residents said the driver and the bull, named Howdy Doody, are a common sight in the area. Police said there were some citable issues with the situation. The responding officer chose to write the driver a warning and asked him to take the animal back home and leave the city. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. When we come back, Ashley's back along with therapist Buck Black to talk mental health for truck drivers. Stick around. Landline Now is back in just a moment.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Landline Now, welcome back. Licensed therapist Buck Black joins me now. Buck, you've had truck drivers as clients. I'm curious, what are some of the common issues they often deal with?
Well, there would be a handful of issues. Loneliness is definitely one of them. If you think about just the fact that the job typically is that you're bouncing around in the truck all day long. 24 hours a day, you're in that truck for days on end, if not weeks on end. So loneliness is a big one. And then plenty of times that leads into depression. And so as far as, feeling really down, lack of energy, being really negative, so that is really common. And then stress and anxiety often goes right along with depression. So as far as, all these worries, just feeling really anxious about all kinds of things. And then plenty of times that leads into relationship problems. So it can definitely all be related there. And then the more relationship problems that you have, either lack of relationships completely or the fact that you have relationships, but yet you're not home enough, and then there's arguing or just feeling distant or unsatisfied. So it can turn into a really complicated situation really quickly.
It sounds like each one is kind of like a domino effect. If you don't deal with one of those things, it can kind of have that domino effect. Is that right?
Right. I think that most people are really trained of being able to spot, all right, this is depression, this is anxiety. I think our society is very good in pointing those things out. And the reality of it is it's all connected. And it goes back to what you said with the domino effect. And then before you know it, life is really tough. And, maybe it's a lot of misery, or maybe it's to the point that you can no longer be on the road just because of everything that's going on and how you're feeling.
When it comes to loneliness, what do you often hear from drivers about this?
Well, sometimes it's drivers being surprised because it's I want to be a truck driver so I can see the country and the call of the open road and, all of that great stuff. And then they're surprised of how isolating it is, how quiet it is, how you see a lot of interstates, and for the most part, the interstate always looks the same, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that drivers are not trained so much to realize that if you're an over-the-road truck driver, you're always in a long-distance relationship. So even, even if you're married, even if you've had a partner for quite some time, now all of a sudden you're in a long-distance relationship, and then nobody ever really understands how tough long-distance relationships are. So there's a lot that comes with the job that's unexpected.
And what tips do you have for drivers who are feeling lonely? When you mentioned depression and anxiety, I think people know, well, there's medication for that, but I don't think there's medication for loneliness. What advice do you have for that?
Mm-hmm. So, a good point that there are no meds for loneliness. If it is a domino effect and you're feeling really anxious, really depressed, then sometimes medication is appropriate to help to deal with that domino effect. But since I'm a therapist, I really do as many natural things as possible as far as changing your thinking, changing your behavior, eating as healthily as possible, of trying to stay away from the junk, trying to stay away from the fast food. So, that's a little bit of it. A big part is accepting the feelings, because a lot of drivers will not want to accept the fact that I am lonely, especially, if it's a guy that is like really macho. Well, I can't be lonely. That's not very macho. Well, we all have those feelings. Mm. So acceptance of the feelings, that's definitely a big part of it. Finding time to be grateful. So, okay, this is really tough. This is lonely. I'm down. But what do I have going in my favor? What can I be grateful for? That's a big thing that drivers often forget. Also, having something to look forward to. So as far as your home time, all right, you have that on your calendar. How much longer do I have to be out before I can come home? and a lot of drivers really push it, and they don't have very much home time at all, and they could have more. So I recognize you're not making money if you're at home, but if you can do some extra home time, then that's definitely something that can help.
Mm-hmm. What about for the spouse or family member that's not on the road, that is at home? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think that it's about trying to connect. And something that I say, pretty much in every interview and to every client, is don't rely on texting. And the sad part of it is that's not getting any better. It's probably getting worse. So if you look at, all right, if I'm trying to connect with my partner, I'm the one at home, and I'm texting, all right, well, there are positives to that. But the more phone calls that you can do, and then if you can safely do a video conference, obviously not while driving, a video chat is something that can help and bring the two of you closer together. I think that that's a big one. Mm-hmm. And then for the partner at home, it's also what can you focus on that is, instead of I'm lonely, it's all right, are there other people I can connect with? Can I get out and, join some kind of club, volunteer, do something that keeps you active? And that's something that can really help. And I want to also add, for the driver, I am a fan of Trucker Buddy. So truckerbuddy.org, being that a driver essentially is a pen pal with a school classroom, so a group of students. And that's a different way to have a little bit of interaction and be a positive role model to kids. And you know what? It helps the kids, and it also helps the driver. Mm-hmm. So getting involved one way or another is something that often helps.
When you talk to truck drivers and they are struggling with their mental health, do they oftentimes pinpoint that it's loneliness, or does that sometimes, do they have different feelings and they don't really realize, that it is just because they are lonely?
Well, usually I don't have anyone call me and say, I'm lonely, I need help. Mm. It is more of, I'm angry and I need help. I'm really stressed out, I need help. And then again, I have whatever type of relationship problem. That's usually how it comes about. And plenty of times, for men, just in general, not every guy is this way at all, but the loneliness is more of an irritability, anger kind of thing. And if you're looking at women in general, they're more likely to say, I'm lonely, or to say, I'm feeling down, I'm having not a good mood. So, yeah, it's important to pay attention to all the feelings that you're feeling, and then trying to figure out, okay, well, what is this about? What can I trace this back to? And when I get home, do I still feel this way, or is that reduced, or does that go away? So, yeah, there's a good bit to it. There's underlying feelings here.
What would you say to someone who may be listening and wondering if they do need to reach out for help?
Well, help is definitely available. The good news is that teletherapy has become so popular over the past few years, as I think most people realize. So there is the politics of needing to talk with a therapist that's licensed in the state that you live. So if you do an online search for teletherapist, and then for the state that you live in, that's a really good path to go down. And then it doesn't necessarily have to be professional. You don't necessarily have to spend money. So any kind of support group that you can find, there's a million Facebook support groups. That kind of thing is good. And then the old-fashioned reaching out to friends, family, old classmates, and you just keep reaching out, and you'll never know who you might find that would be helpful. So there's plenty of different ways to connect with other people and to get help.
And you kind of touched on this earlier, but what are some of the signs or questions even someone should ask themselves if they think they might need help, but they're not really sure?
Well, it goes back to functioning. So that would be what I would say is the number one thing. So if you feel that you're not functioning very well, And what I mean by that is if you can't really get through your workday so well, that's something to pay attention to. That's an indicator. If someone is any of the above, as far as anxious, depressed, really lonely, all that stuff, typically you're not going to sleep very well. So if you find yourself having a really hard time going to sleep or having a hard time waking up or difficulty staying asleep, so anything sleep related, that is often an indicator that they need to work on things. Appetite is another one. So either you're not eating or you're eating way too much. That would be another one. So it can get more complicated than that, but those are the typical questions that I ask any new client, just to get an idea of how are they doing with their mood, how are they feeling overall. And if you're struggling in that area and it's going on for a few weeks, it's good to reach out to someone. So, yeah.
Why is it so important to reach out and get help?
Because mental health is still incredibly ignored. It has gotten better over the past few years, so I do want to give credit to the fact that we are in better shape as far as awareness of mental health. But typically, before somebody gets help for mental health, whether it's therapy, a support group, or going to the doctor for meds, the person has had this issue for years. It depends on what studies you look at. The number that comes up commonly is 7 years of going through these feelings of depression, anxiety, all of this, before a person gets help. So what I try to do as a therapist is help people to speed that up. So don't suffer for 7 years. You know, if you have these feelings going on for several weeks, then talk to somebody and see what's going on. I'd much rather a person reach out a little prematurely, or it end up being nothing, and go that route versus waiting for years on it.
When you do get a new client in there, do you often find sometimes they're hesitant on, is this really going to work?
Sure. And I think that makes sense. And if you look at just everything in the world that is, that there's so many scams, there's so much snake oil, so many promises of things that are not realistic, it's good to be skeptical. And what I find myself telling clients on a very regular basis is, okay, well, just Google what I say. So I'll give some tips, and the more the person is skeptical, do your own research and look at credible websites when you Google, obviously. But, it's like as simple as if you get some exercise every day and you try to eat as many fruits and vegetables as you can and try to back off on the fast food, there's science that shows that already helps with mood. And there's science that shows that, if you just call up an old friend and talk with them for a few minutes, that helps with the loneliness, that helps with mood. So for the skeptical people, I would say, number one, do your research. There's a lot of information on mental health out there all the way around. And number two, give it a try and maybe get a self-help book, start with that, see the techniques, and then you'll find something that works for you. If you feel that you need more, talk with a therapist, talk with your doctor. They'll suggest more things. Give it a try because it definitely does help.
That was Buck Black, a licensed therapist, talking about mental health and the importance of seeking help. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Weigh your truck on a CAT scale. When you weigh on a CAT scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Fantastic.
Great. Ashley, how are you?
I am wonderful.
Good.
Today we are talking about personal vehicle violations. And starting off, I'm curious, are people sometimes surprised that violations in a personal vehicle count against your commercial insurance policy?
I wouldn't say the majority, but we do have callers that are kind of taken aback or surprised when we're asking about tickets, violations, accidents in a personal or commercial vehicle.
And I think a lot of times it's the accidents that trip them up a little bit more. Whether they show up on the motor vehicle report or not, that's a different story for a different day, or maybe later. I don't know. But for sure, I think that people tend to be taken aback that the personal violations and accidents affect their commercial insurance. I mean, really all we have to do is sort of explain we get the same motor vehicle report regardless.
Right. Well, and it's the same license, and we say that a lot too.
It's the same license. A CDL is just an endorsement.
Correct.
Yes,
correct.
Exactly.
Good job.
I know. You have taught me so much. When someone calls for coverage, what kind of things are you looking at when you get that driving record?
Well, every insurance company is going to be different.
Wait, what?
I know. Check with your agent. But typically you're looking at a 3-year history for your everyday type violations like speeding or even not at fault accidents or that sort of thing. There are some violations that your insurance company might take into consideration when they're looking for some sort of a pattern. They might look beyond that 3 years. Or if they're even like the possibility of a criminal history or DUIs or that sort of thing, they sort of might look beyond that 3 years. But usually they're looking at the most current 3-year history.
Right.
Is it safe to say like the agent's kind of trying to see what kind of driver you are?
Well, yeah. Trista used a good word saying pattern because that is something we see from time to time. Maybe there hasn't been a whole lot recently, but you can see that someone gets a speeding ticket once or twice a year, every year. And part of that, we talked about this earlier off the air, Trista and I, but sometimes it depends on the driving record in the state. Every state is different with how far they go back on the driving record or what you're able to see on the driving record. That plays a part too. But, when the underwriters are looking at it, they, pattern stuff does stick out. So if you're consistently getting speeding tickets and that doesn't seem to have changed, I'm not saying that they, will decline to write the policy or anything like that. But again, every insurance company is different. And, it is a factor.
Yeah, and chances are if they're not declining to write the policy, you're at least looking at additional premiums for that pattern or that history. And that's why it's so important. We talk about like professional drivers. This is your profession. This is your career, and protecting that history and that CDL is really, up to you, and seeing what kind of driver you are
right
affects a huge portion of that, premium-wise, decline-wise, all of that.
Yes. And patterns, and I think this is what I was wanting to try and get at earlier. Patterns tend to be the same no matter what kind of vehicle you're in. So, again, going back to the topic at hand, if it's in a personal vehicle, it's still going to tell a story to them about what type of driver you are. Because usually people don't drive differently, and just because they're in a different vehicle.
Yeah. Like if you have a lead foot in the car.
Right.
It might be a safe assumption that.
Yeah, generally that's probably just how you drive.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, you mentioned about driving records. How does it work, say, if I have had a driver's license in different states, and how far does that go back?
We've seen a variety of things with that because sometimes the information doesn't transfer over to the new state. So maybe you were licensed in Louisiana and you change it to Texas. And I'm just like pulling states out of thin air. I don't recall if they transfer or not. But some of them don't transfer that information to the new state while others do. And so sometimes it can kind of skew what we're able to see. Maybe it depends on the service that you use to obtain the driving record. And then there's other states that will go back to 19 dickety-doo.
And they transfer all their information to the new state. So if they transfer that information, then you still sort of have that history. But if they don't, there's a chance that you could be asked for an old license number out of a different state so that they can sort of put those two histories together.
And you had kind of mentioned this briefly. Do insurance companies sometimes look at criminal records to see if there's any?
Yes, they do. I mean, that's really kind of the short answer of it. If there are red flags on the motor vehicle reports, sometimes, if there's a pattern of violations and then no violations for a 3-year period and then some violations again currently, that can be a red flag to them, and they can check a criminal history and, possibly see incarcerations or that sort of thing. And those can be taken into consideration as well. I mean, number one, underwriters would say because of character, but number two, mostly because of that sort of gap in driving history.
Right.
And at what point does an insurance company look at someone's record and say, you know what, this person, they'll need to be charged more, or we just wouldn't cover them at all? Is there like a hard, fast rule, or is it?
To some degree. I mean, I think a lot of insurance companies are going to have, some level of discretion. And usually it's up to the underwriters as to how that's handled. We've got some that I would say pretty hard, fast rules about, if you've had a DUI in the last few years or an at-fault accident involving a fatality. There's certain serious violations, I guess you would say, that will prevent us from writing a policy. If you've got a couple of speeding tickets, it's probably just going to be a little bit of an upcharge on your policy. There's always variables. And again, surprise, it's going to depend on the agent that you're talking to. Yeah. Any insurance company is going to have some sort of a standard, some sort of a guideline. But that's not to say there aren't variables as well.
And when insurance companies do make these decisions, it's not just based off of one person saying like, well, this is what I think. Are you looking at statistics and studies? And
Absolutely.
Statistics play a huge role in it. I know there is a huge argument about speeding tickets and why those raise your rates, especially if you're accident-free for, 20 years. But the statistics do show that those speeding tickets lead to an accident. And so that's why, even a lot of times the agents won't have control over those rates. Those are sort of actuaries and that sort of thing, putting together statistics and guidelines that have to be followed.
What are some of the most common violations you see people having?
Speeding.
Yeah, speeding is the biggest one that we see. I would say next to that probably something that would fit in the category of failure to yield or
some sort of a traffic control device.
Yeah, not following a device or a sign, that sort of thing.
The speeding, man, it has ranges though. Some of these poor drivers I've talked to, I've literally seen a speeding ticket for 1 over, like 1 mile per hour over, which I'm like, well, that seems a little. Yeah. But then you have, and going back to personal vehicle, because I think it would be more difficult in a commercial vehicle, but going back to personal vehicles, we see it to the other extent of like drag racing or, 25 miles an hour over or more, over the speed limit. So we can easily say, we see speeding the most, but man, there's still
a wide variable of those speeding tickets.
What about not at fault accidents?
Well, not at fault accidents, again, that sort of goes back to those actuaries and those statistics. And it's hard for all of us to understand not at fault accidents affecting your rates. But I would say most insurance companies are using the same statistics, and those statistics say, especially, again, we go back to that pattern. If there's a pattern of not at fault accidents, it begs the question of defensive driving.
Right.
And if there's a lack of defensive driving, those are shown to lead to at fault accidents as well. So yes, the short answer to your question is not at fault accidents can and will affect your rates and possibly even determine acceptability.
I mean, I'm guessing that they've affected my rates on my personal insurance because I've been T-boned by a deer twice in the last 2 years.
That is shocking.
Clearly not my fault because they T-boned me. But I mean, I can also see where to an insurance company, I live in an area prone to that, and so that could potentially cause a rate increase. Or, going back to kind of what Trista was talking about, a lot of the air quotes, not at fault accidents we see are someone who's, been rear-ended a couple of times. And the underwriters are going to ask themselves, are you moving over when you shouldn't be? Are you switching lanes when it's not safe?
Braking quickly as opposed to slowly braking when you see traffic ahead doing the same thing, and
or are you road raging?
Exactly. Right.
If you're calling for coverage and you have some violations on your driving history, how should you disclose that to the agent?
You're going to be asked the question, the way that I kind of hear it asked most often is, do you have any tickets or accidents in the last 3 years? And when you are asked that question, the best thing you can do is be open and honest with your agent. Even if it's something small, go ahead and disclose it to them because chances are they're going to find it anyway.
Right.
So if you don't disclose it up front, you're going to get a rate. And then chances are that policy is either going to be underwritten after it was wrote or at the time of bind or whatever the case might be. And you're going to see the rate increase then. And, instead of being surprised by that at a later time or possibly even the decline of coverage then.
Right.
And instead of being surprised by that at a later time, making deposits, that sort of thing, it's just best to let your agent know and disclose everything up front.
And we can tell you from personal experience, it is not fun to tell someone that their rates have gone up. No one wants to hear it. Even if it was because something wasn't disclosed, it's not fun for us. It's not fun for the customer. It just stinks.
Yeah.
It really does.
Right.
And you said 3 years. Is that fair? Should, if I've had...
I think 3 to 5 is...
Yeah, 3 to 5
pretty
is
fair
fair.
range.
And then anything that shows up sort of beyond that, and they'll give you a time range. So just sort of pay attention to that time range when you're asked.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Welcome back to the last leg of Landline Now. Today, we'll finish up with speed limiters, a topic you're going to be hearing a lot about in the coming weeks and months as FMCSA is close to issuing more information about its proposed mandate. As truckers, you obviously care about the implications here, but honestly, the general public should too, because a mandate like this will touch everyone out on the road. And if you want to get Colin Long, OIDA Director of Government Affairs, fired up, bring up speed limiters, and that's just why we're bringing him onto the show today. Colin, you ready? You ready to get fired up?
I'm seeing red. Yes, I'm ready.
All right, perfect. That's exactly how we like you, Colin. So as I mentioned, we're still waiting on details from FMCSA about what this speed limiter mandate is going to look like exactly. That could come any day now. But in the meantime, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of imagine a world in which heavy trucks were speed limited across the country. And I think it's pretty clear, at least to me, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, Colin, but this is not something that the general public really thinks about or even knows about at this point, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's going to be a rude awakening if this mandate goes into effect for the driving public. And they will have regretted not being engaged earlier on the issue, because we're looking at highways like those in Texas and Montana, where speeds are very high for passenger vehicles. I mean, trucks could be slowed down to as slow as 60 miles an hour on those roads. That's going to be a nightmare for a lot of folks who don't know this mandate is coming and don't know the potential impact it will have on the entire driving public. And I think when we talk to lawmakers here in the Washington, D.C. area, most folks, including their staffers, have driven on Interstate 81. I mean, it goes up and down the East Coast, basically. All the folks we talk to say, oh, I can't imagine this happening. Imagine what 81 would be like. I wish the public across the country would appreciate that fact and relate it to whatever highway it is they use in their local communities. Because if it has speeds of 70 to 75 miles an hour, even 65, there's going to be a huge speed differential between cars and trucks as this mandate goes in place. And that's going to have a lot of impact on the daily commutes and the traveling of the driving public. And I think it's going to be, like I said, a rude awakening for them when or if it takes place.
Yeah, and let's let them or help them appreciate anybody out there listening who may not completely understand what this is going to mean, again, if it takes effect. You talk about the speed differential there. This has big safety implications. It also has big, I guess we could call them frustration implications, because you're going to see a lot more of these so-called elephant races on highways wherein people behind them just can't pass. Can you talk a little bit, I guess, about those two things? We'll start with the frustration part of this, and then we'll get into the safety implications.
Yeah, I mean, some of the most compelling arguments against speed limiters come from drivers who are operating vehicles that are currently speed limited, because they see how passenger vehicle drivers interact around them when they're going much slower than the flow of traffic. And frankly, from what we've heard and from what our members have experienced, people go a little crazy when they come up on trucks that are speed limited and one is trying to very slowly pass the other, or just to merge or exit or get onto a highway. People have expressed frustration about what type of effect speed limited vehicles will have on their ability to do that as well. And I think that's really what you have to think about, is the fact that, yes, if you slow down trucks, you may reduce crash severity, but you can't then ignore all the other types of effects this will have on how people act on our roads in a time when they're acting more harebrained than I think they ever have been. I mean, our members are constantly telling us, our board is constantly telling us, the driving habits of the general public, people in passenger vehicles, have gotten so much worse over the years. And now we're talking about slowing down all the trucks to prevent accidents with them, when we know, based on experience, that crash rates are likely to increase as a result of this. And I think a lot of that will be because folks in passenger vehicles just simply don't know how to interact safely and properly with a much slower moving truck.
Yeah, and again, you kind of brought up road rage there. That's one concern that I have with this because, again, you're going to see a lot of frustrated people out there who don't understand why they're stuck behind, two semis and they're seemingly just going the same speed for miles on end. You're going to have that. And then you talked briefly there about the interactions. The speed differential there, again, if you've got a car going 85 and they're coming up on a semi that's going, 65 because they can't go any faster, or 60 or whatever the speed limit ends up being if this does go into effect, you're going to have more interactions between those two vehicles. And as you mentioned there, people don't really have a lot of patience on the roads these days, and you very well could have a crash.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about vehicle interaction rates increasing, when you start to develop speed differentials between trucks and cars, that's not OOIDA talking. I mean, that's researchers talking, folks who have made a professional career out of understanding how speed affects safety on our highways. And they continuously say the same thing, don't create differentials, because every 10 miles per hour difference between the flow of traffic increases vehicle interaction by 227%, which leads to higher crash risk. I mean, it just goes without saying. So unfortunately, we're combating an agency here in Washington who doesn't want to consider those effects, doesn't even talk about those effects. I mean, they're so focused on reducing crash severity that they've developed this massive blind spot for how will the general public react to speed-limited vehicles? What type of effect will that have on safety? We haven't even gotten into the supply chain yet, or driver retention. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of negative effects of the speed limiter mandate that they just are either ignoring or deciding that it's not included in their jurisdiction, so they don't have the capability to consider it. But that's where OOIDA steps in, and that's where we start educating folks, including the general public, about what type of effects this speed limiter mandate may have on them. And I think people start to realize, it may sound good at face value to slow down trucks to save lives and prevent injuries, but when you start understanding all these secondary effects, I think that's when people start realizing, well, maybe this is kind of a backwards approach to promoting highway safety. And thankfully, we've convinced we've convinced lawmakers of that.
Yeah.
And they've introduced legislation to prevent this from moving forward. But we still have an uphill battle. And I think the more the general public knows about this, the more difficult it becomes for FMCSA to move forward with a final rulemaking.
We've got about 90 seconds here, Colin. I do want to ask you, in an ideal world, the general public would be engaged in this conversation already. We don't live in an ideal world, obviously.
No.
I'm going to bet the vast majority of regular non-trucking Americans have really, again, no idea that this issue is floating around out there.
None.
What would or what should outreach look like? Is this a family and friends type thing where you let everybody you know understand the situation and what's going on?
I don't think it hurts, but I don't know how much help it is. I mean, I think the focus should remain on lawmakers here in Washington. Try and convince them, hey, this is a bad idea, and Congress needs to take steps to prevent it, because the public is pulled in so many different directions.
Yeah.
Even if a mandate goes into effect, they still won't really feel it affecting them until they're actually out on the road dealing with trucks. But it's a slippery slope, and one thing we always remind folks is, if they're coming for trucks first, we know they're coming for cars second. So you'll be the next one up for the agencies to start imposing speed limit mandates.
Yeah, and maybe that's the message, and maybe the message is to your family and friends, hey, reach out to your lawmakers, and as the driver of a passenger vehicle, let them know why you think this is a bad idea.
Exactly.
If they hear from enough people, that very well could gain some traction there. So
you're absolutely right.
Colin, you were sufficiently fired up. We appreciate it. You're going to get more fired up as the year progresses here, as we get more information about this, I know, and we'll be talking a lot about it. We appreciate your time.
Sure, thanks. I thought I was a little timid today, so I'll be back.
Yeah, bring that level up next time. All right, Colin, thanks. That's a wrap on the show today. We thank you for listening and do hope you'll join us again soon. We've got another show tomorrow, but check out landline.media in the meantime for more news and analysis from the trucking industry. From everyone here at Landline Now, take care and drive safe out there.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.